Hello, everybody. My name's John Pollock. I'm the program manager here at CUAHSI and filling in for Liz Tran to run the show here today. Just a reminder, today's presentation will be recorded, so you'll be able to access it later, as well as distribute to any of your colleagues that weren't able to make it today. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that the CUAHSI Biennial is coming up this summer at the end of July. We have a poster deadline, which is May 1st, so that's fast approaching. So if you are interested in presenting a poster at the conference this summer, please do make sure to get your abstract in. So today we're here to continue the series entitled Quasi-Water Data Services for Supporting Scientific Research and Education. Please, as we go through the presentation, type any questions you have into the chat box, and we will be able to stop periodically to have our speaker answer the questions. And our speaker today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tony Castronova, who joined us here at CUAHSI about 2 years ago as a hydrologic scientist. Tony has a PhD in civil engineering from the University of South Carolina, and he's been working here at CUAHSI with us to improve the ability of our community to do reproducible science and lowering barriers for the reuse of models and code, specifically through Jupyter technology. So without any further, Tony, please take it away.
Thanks, John. Let me share my screen. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about cyber infrastructure to support water science education and reproducible science. And as John mentioned, this is largely going to focus on JupyterHub and also the HydroShare software platform that CUAHSI is engaged with. The seminar series, again, that John mentioned, these are the three presentations. I'm going to recap slightly on some of these, especially the previous one from last week. So the first, Liza talked a bit about tools that we're developing and services that we offer to help host and disseminate your research or your scientific findings. Last week, Mark Henderson talked about collaborative research focusing specifically on HydroShare. And this week, we're going to take what Mark talked about, the HydroShare platform, and extend it to reproducible science. The link for the archived data or the archived seminars is provided there at the bottom, as well as a link to a HydroShare resource that contains the presentations from the three of us and any supporting data you might be interested in. So go check those things out, and we can revisit those towards the end of the seminar. But like John said, this will also be it's being recorded and it'll be on the CUAHSI website. So the talk today is actually pretty simple. It's going to focus heavily on demos, but before we get to the demos, I'll give you a brief introduction to CUAHSI. This is probably, or hopefully, things that many of you have already seen before. A quick HydroShare recap, since what I'm going to present, or what I am presenting, will extend to some of the talks from the previous seminar. I want to just revisit a little bit of the HydroShare key functionality. And then we'll dive right into the JupyterHub architecture that we're developing and maintaining here at CUAHSI, and then into two different demos. So the first demo is going to be a basic, how do you get started with JupyterHub? What is it all about? That sort of an approach. And the second one will be taking that a step further and applying that workflow to your own science or your own research, reproducing published findings, things like that. And I'll just conclude with some thoughts on next steps for those of you that want to engage further. And I guess before we really get going, I do want to point out that, or mention that I'm hoping that the attendees today will leave having a good idea of what this JupyterHub service that we are developing is all about, and understand how it can be applied to their research as well as as well as being used as an educational tool, something maybe in a classroom or a workshop or a cyber seminar like this. Okay, so let's get into it. So CUAHSI is a nonprofit organization. We're a consortium membership from U.S. institutions. We also have international universities, and we have some private organizations that we work with. We are primarily funded by the National Science Foundation. However, we do have other funding sources listed below. Many of those apply to specific projects. Just as an example, starting a dialogue in the community about water-related issues through the use of video. That is something we call Let's Talk About Water. That's funded by one of these different organizations or organizations below. So they're generally smaller dollar amounts for very specific reasons, but primarily NSF. Because we're NSF funded, our focus is primarily on U.S. data and U.S. institutions. But our overall goal is to shape the future of hydrologic science by strengthening collaboration, developing and delivering data, instrumentation, and other technologies, and also promoting education. We do this through two primary activities, or two major avenues. The first one is community services. And community services, and this takes the form of things like workshops. You may have seen us at conferences, community meetings, trainings, cyber seminars like this one, as well as data services. And these are really software to support science. And two major technologies that you may be familiar with are the hydrologic information system, which is really the backbone of a lot of actually, it is the backbone of our observation data that we, observation data platforms that we have, as well as HydroShare, which is kind of a new technology that we're maintaining, and we're still heavily involved in the development efforts of that. So just to touch a little bit more on some of the things, some of the community service and data services that that we provide. On the left-hand side, there's a few bullet points here. Developing new and learning new instrumentation methods, extending your research by adding a field site, or developing tools. These are opportunities that we offer early career scientists, generally in the form of funding to kind of accomplish these things. But we also have other larger efforts, such as the Summer Innovators Program at the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This is something we're really excited about. We're going on the 4th year. It's each year a pool of students go down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama for the summer and work at the National Water Center and work with U.S. agencies such as the Weather Service, the USGS, the Corps of Engineers. And the main goal is to contribute to the National Water Center goals, which has largely focused on the development and improvement of the National Water Model, which is a continental scale model. So it's a really exciting opportunity. A lot of effort goes into that. The last point here, I'm just going to mention that we engage in various other efforts through collaboration with NSF, collaboration on NSF projects with academic universities. And HydroShare is just one example of that. I don't have to spend much time on this because John already introduced it, but for those of you that maybe came in late, the biennial meeting is coming up. It's the end of July. The focus or the overall theme for the meeting is hydrologic connections in climate, food, energy, environment, and society. There are other there are workshops and sessions that you can take a look at online, but the deadlines are fast approaching for abstracts. So take a look at that if you're interested. So that is the community services. Some of the data services that we offer. These are software products that we develop in collaboration with academic or in collaboration on academic projects. also things that we develop in-house. But I think the key thing to point out here is that these are tools to enable science. CUAHSI itself does not do research. We are building tools to enable research and enable science in general. So beyond the academic community toward thinking about citizen scientists and things like that. These tools mostly focus on sharing, discovering, analyzing, and collaborating with colleagues. We believe in free and open source software, so all of our projects are available on GitHub. I don't have the link in this presentation, but if you go to GitHub and you search CUAHSI, you'll see all of our software there. We're always open to contributions from anybody who's interested. The common theme you'll see here is that each of these software components, I'll call them, or software services, aim to fulfill specific data management obligations. So while one service doesn't offer a complete platform for data management, collectively they all offer different. They collectively try to address this problem in terms of hosting your data, making it public, sharing, things like that. A lot of our applications are focused on both research and classroom, so keep that in mind as well. So just an example of one of the software applications I'm talking about, or I guess I should call them data services. This is the Hydro client. You can find this at data.cuahsi.org. It's a web interface for searching, viewing, and downloading observation data that searches across the Hydrologic Information System, or HIS network. If you want to learn more about this, I believe Liza talked a little bit about it in the first Cyberseminar, so you might want to check that out. But this is just one example of some of the things that we're doing in the data services. I don't see any questions, but yeah, just a reminder to type those in as we go along, because I don't have any specific breaks to stop for questions. There should be time at the end, but if you have anything, we'll answer them as they come in. So please ask questions if you have them. So moving on here, before we get into the JupyterHub discussion, we need to take a quick look back at what HydroShare is. And this was talked in quite a bit of detail in the previous Cyberseminar by Mark Henderson. So if you're confused at all about some of the HydroShare concepts or elements that I'm presenting in this work, take a look at that recording afterwards. But HydroShare, and it's actually the homepage looks just like this on the left side of the screen. HydroShare is a platform for archiving and managing various data sets. And data sets can range anywhere from a CSV file to a model simulation. So there's a huge range of data and applications that we're trying to capture here. The overall workflow is kind of described here on the bottom left corner. A user will create data, and this normally happens locally on your own computer. And then you'll upload it to HydroShare, enhance that data by adding metadata that describes, the what, where, when of your data set. And then you can share with colleagues. Now, there's a few steps that aren't really shown here. And that is, when you share with your colleagues, there might be some more iteration. And this iteration can still happen through the HydroShare web interface. There's concepts such as versioning and access and control that allow you to collaborate on the data set while it's in HydroShare. And the final step that's not really shown here is formal publication of your data, meaning that when your data is, when you are complete or finished with your study, your data is a final draft, you can publish it, make it immutable, and be issued a digital object identifier, which can be cited in your journal publication. So this is really the overall workflow that we're trying to promote with HydroShare. To get a better idea of what that looks like, the figures on the right just show what data looks like in HydroShare. They're called resources. But if we take a look at that first resource called Great Salt Lake Level and Volume by Dave Tarbatin, the figure at the bottom right shows that it has content, has a sharing status. There's a whole lot of metadata that's not shown there. And I will actually be showing some of that throughout this presentation, or through the examples, actually. So moving on, now we should know everything we need to know to fully understand how JupyterHub, the purpose of JupyterHub and how it works. So let's get right into it. This might get a little bit geeky, but hang in there if you're not up for that kind of stuff, because we'll get into some examples that should clarify quite a bit of things. But to first understand what JupyterHub is, we need to understand what Jupyter Notebooks are. So the main assumption, one assumption I'm making right now, is that most attendees on this call know what a Jupyter Notebook is. But if you don't, they're shown here on the right. These are just a screenshot, I believe, from the Jupyter project website. It's a combination of code, such as Python or R, but it actually supports various languages. We're only going to focus on Python today, but you have code, and you enhance that with rich text, including equations and figures and things like that. So it ends up being a really effective educational tool for describing a process or a calculation. And it's also a very effective way of disseminating your research or your science along with a data set, so someone can actually reproduce what you did. And that's actually the main avenue we're going to look at today. So JupyterHub is slightly different. It takes the same Jupyter concepts, and instead of running them on your local computer, they execute on a server in the cloud. There's a GitHub page I have listed here, github.com/JupyterHub. Take a look at that if you're interested in contributing. But what ends up happening is we have this hosted in the cloud, and when a new user comes in, their own workspace is created for them, their own isolated environment is created for them, and they have many pre-configured libraries and models at their disposal. Now, at that point, users can continue, can do research in the cloud, or they can execute existing workflows shared by other people, things like that. So that's the high-level overview. We're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty stuff. But first, let's talk about some of the design criteria that we have in mind in developing this, while we develop this JupyterHub platform. And maybe I should clarify that the JupyterHub platform is an open source project that anyone can contribute to. What I'll be talking about is the CUAHSI JupyterHub platform, which is specifically designed to be integrated with HydroShare. But when designing this thing, we're considering annoyingly large data. So this isn't quite big data, but it's data that you can't move around easily. Data that actually takes some computational horsepower, I guess, to analyze. So we're looking at the scale of maybe gigabytes, not at the scale of terabytes and petabytes. So that's why I have big data in quotes. We're not quite at big data, and I don't really think that we will be in the near future. But we are looking to build a capacity for scientists and educators to play around with large data sets. In addition, supporting computationally intensive workflows or tool chains. This can be model simulations or model calibrations, and then as well as educating and disseminating knowledge. So supporting classroom-like activities, supporting reproducible science, things that may be published in journal articles and stuff like that. The software architecture is pretty complicated. I'm not really going to walk through all of this. I think it might be more valuable to jump into the demos about now. But just to give anyone out there an idea of what we're looking at here, we have a connection between HydroShare through a REST API to this JupyterHub web application, which is actually it used to be hosted at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign at the Rogers supercomputer, which I believe is currently down for maintenance, and there is some we're looking at getting it spun back up there in the future. But it's at RENC, the Renaissance Computing Center in North Carolina. There's also efforts to deploy this on Exceed resources such as Jetstream and take advantage of some more high performance computing capabilities, especially when we're looking at model simulation. But yeah, we have HydroShare will communicate to JupyterHub through REST API. A user space is created consisting of data, examples, tests, utilities, or utility libraries, and this is all spun up in a containerized environment that only a single user has access to. Over a period of inactivity, these containers are cleaned up, but the data that you create still exists. So next time you come in, your data is still there. I think that's the key takeaway. It's a disposable computational environment or disposable environment for you to work in, but your data persists.
Hey, Tony.
Yes.
We have a question. Mohammed asks, is there a desk size quote for each user?
A disk size quota?
I think, yeah, it sounds like it's a data quota question. Yeah,
okay, so that's a good question. So what we are looking at right now at the Renaissance Computing Institute, we have a single server with, I think it's 60 CPUs and 1 terabyte of RAM. Each user is a little bit constrained there. I think we're constraining to 16 gigabytes of RAM per user. We recommend that you stay underneath 20 gigabytes of disk space. There is no upper limit right now. There will be in the near future. We have seen some issues as people end up getting in the 50, 60 gigabytes of data that creating or initiating these containers will time out. So there is an issue with mounting large data volumes at this point. And we don't have plans to support large data uses like that, except probably in very special circumstances. So I would say if you for best performance, try to stay underneath 20 gigabytes, and that will probably be the limit that we institute in the future. Okay, John, is there any other questions, or is that?
Nope, that's it for now. Thanks, Tony.
Yep, fantastic. All right, so let's jump into so getting started. So you're new to JupyterHub, you want to learn how to use this thing. So this, whatever we're seeing right now is just kind of an example of what you might see when you first jump in there, an example notebook on the left and some of the data you can create. But I'm going to go ahead and just jump into what this would look like. So if you were to go to hydroshare.org, so if you're new to the whole system, I would recommend going to hydroshare.org. You'll be presented with the home page. And I'm just going to jump through a couple of these tabs to remind ourselves what they mean. If I were to click on My Resources, you're presented with all of the data that you are an owner or author of, or things that have been shared with you. So my area is very cluttered. I've been a user for a long time, and I try to be an active user. So I have a whole bunch of examples, things, and tests and stuff like that. If you wanted to see the community's data, you would click on the Discover tab or Discover menu button here, and you'll be presented with something like this. So a quick summary of what data is out there, but you have the ability to search for all sorts of other data. And I'm going to search real quick for Cyberseminar, see what pops up. And it looks like there's some data right here called CUAHSI's 2018 Spring Seminar Series. And this actually is a collection of 3 different data sets. The presentation that you're looking at today, as well as the ones from Liza and Mark in the past couple weeks. So if you're interested in all of them, they're right there. The recordings, however, are at CUAHSI.org. Collaborate. This is where you would go to join a group or create a group. Groups are collections of people, all kind of focused around a specific topic. and you can see things nearshore processes. iUtah, that's a project out in Utah. So if we wanted to find one maybe called CUAHSI, this is something that you can join if you were interested. There's also one called CUAHSI Cyberseminars, which you could potentially join. If you were to go to these, you'll see a list of members and resources associated with this. You can see that the data for the Cyberseminar series exists in there. And there's only two members, me and Mark. But if you are interested, you could go ahead and ask to join, and you will be given access. I'm going to skip over apps real quick. We have the help, which will obviously show you help documentation. Definitely a great place to go if you have any questions about HydroShare. And then the About tab just tells you a little bit about who we are, or who HydroShare is, the HydroShare contributors are. So if we click on apps, we're presented with a short list of official web applications. These are things that are actively maintained by the HydroShare community or by CUAHSI. There are more web applications that are out there. These are the ones that we feel confident in recommending because we have some control over how stable they are. So let's jump into JupyterHub. So if you are new, you would go to hydroshare.org, click on apps, and click on JupyterHub. Fantastic. That was super fast because my user space has already been created. If it's the first time, if you're doing this for the first time, you may see a little bit of a delay, maybe a few seconds while your environment is created for you. But now we're at this URL, jupiter.cuahsi.org. And like I said, everything that we do from here on out is actually happening at North Carolina at the Renaissance Computing Institute. If you're familiar with Jupyter notebooks, this will look very familiar to you. If you're not, I'm going to go through a couple things here that you might want to know about. You have some standard functionality. You can create folders, delete them, rename things, move them. You can create new Python notebooks, Python 2.7 and 3. You can create an R notebook in R 3.4, text files, folders, terminals, things like that. This is your Linux user space to play around with. Couple folders that are important. One is, let's start with the help folder. The help folder are really examples that are available to everyone. I have a few extra things in here because I play around a little bit, but these are like boilerplate examples for new people, new users to play around with, to learn about how you can use JupyterHub for different modeling applications or different data analysis applications or even GIS. The utilities directory has a bunch of Python libraries that are provided to every user to help them interact with specific modeling applications, or HydroShare is a very common one. So if you want to collect data and pass data back and forth between HydroShare, you're going to be using some utilities down here. And then the last one I'm going to talk about here is the data directory. So like I said, that I've mentioned twice now that these are things that are supplied to every user. The data directory is empty. And that's because this is your space to save your data. You can see all of this stuff I have in here. This is the area that will persist. None of this should go away. Different things I was messing around with at some point or another. The data, if you were to edit a notebook or an example, that will be overwritten in the future when new updates come out. So be very careful about editing things outside of the data directory. We'll also give you a welcome notebook. So this welcome notebook is what you saw in my slides, and really just shows some examples how to get started, right? Where are you? This is a quick description of where you are, a description of how to connect to HydroShare, querying data from HydroShare, what kind of work you might, this is an area you might want to do some work. There's an example of some things you can do. And then when you're all done, there's some code here at the bottom that will help you save your data from JupyterHub back into HydroShare as a new resource. So to demonstrate this process, I'm going to walk through one of these examples that we have at the top. In this one, I'm going to go through the time series resource. So the purpose of this, and I'm just going to kind of step through these as I talk, because we're not really talking about code today. But the purpose of this is to collect data from HydroShare, and that's happening in this step right here. We're collecting it based on a specific resource ID. It says that I already have this data. Do I want to overwrite it? Yes, I do. I already have this data because I've executed this notebook before, and I didn't delete the data from my user space. So it downloaded this, the content of that resource, which we could actually click on, and maybe that would be a good thing to do. Click on this resource, and we can see exactly what we're downloading. Water temperature for the Little Bear River, and that's in Utah, and this was created by Jeff Horsborough at Utah State University. Okay, so we have this data in JupyterHub now, and it's loaded into memory. We can inspect what's in this database. So it's a SQLite database, printing the variables, any kind of people that are documented inside that database, the different sampling areas, the variables at those sampling areas, and just step up for a couple more of these. If you wanted to learn how to use ODM2, this would be a fantastic example to walk through. Well, we can plot these data, and this is an example of a utility library that we provide for you to plot ODM2 data easily if you needed something like that. So we're plotting 4 different locations, temperature in the river, and then we can also plot those all in one figure. And that's more of the data discovery, kind of looking at your data, but we might want to do something more interesting with it, such as something very basic might be calculating min, max, and averages, which we just did, and then plot these min, max, and averages for average daily temperature for one of these rivers in particular. We can save this however we want. I'm going to create a text file. I'm going to print out some of the lines in that text file. So it's just a CSV file with a header and some data. Fantastic. And I apologize if I went over that really fast. The goal isn't really to describe how to use, how to analyze data in ODM2 database, but more of how you can show someone, or someone can learn how to walk through or learn about using, say, something like ODM2 by walking through a notebook. But one of the things I really want to highlight here is saving your data back to HydroShare. We performed some sort of analysis. It was pretty simple in this case, but we want to save our new data set back to HydroShare so someone else can kind of pick up where we left off and play around. So using a utility library that we provide for you, we can define things like the title of the title that we want to use, the abstract, keywords, the type of resource, and we can specify whatever we want. I'm actually going to change this to composite resource because it's a newer type of resource that adds a little bit of functionality that I want to show you. We have some files. We have our aggregated data file that we just created, that CSV file. We have the original ODM database that was downloaded from HydroShare that we were kind of looking through. And we also have this notebook. So we can save, basically what we're looking at is the raw data, the notebook that defines the processing that we did on that data, and then the final product. That's what we have defined right here. And then this last cell will actually just insert this into HydroShare. So it should take just a second. Created a resource. Now it's adding these individual content to it. And we're given a resource ID. We can use that to find our resource in HydroShare, or we can click this link that should open our newly recreated data in HydroShare. Okay, so here we are. This is what was just created, a daily aggregate temperature for Little Bear River near Mendon, Utah. The abstract that I put in there is kind of pitiful. This is definitely not, you'd probably want something a little more descriptive. We have the keywords that I entered. We have the data files, and this is pretty cool, right? So we have our CSV data. We have our notebook that we used to perform our data analysis, and we have our raw data in SQLite format. Okay, and keep in mind, we don't really have much of anything else, right? We have, I created this, okay, that's about it. So let's enhance this a little bit. Because we used a composite resource, we can define metadata or extract metadata from specific files. And the one I'm interested in is the SQLite file, which is a recognized file type, a recognized time series file type. And if I click this, it should extract metadata from within this database and populate attributes on the page we're looking at here. All right, so let's go on down, and the first thing we have is a spatial extent has been defined, which is great. We have a temporal date range, which again, fantastic. We can look at the individual data for this. So if we select our file and click on File Metadata, we see we have water temperature for Little Bear River. We have some overall metadata for that database. We also have each of the individual time series that exist in there. So I can choose one of those and look at the metadata that's associated with it, things like instrumentation and site information, variable information, things like that. So this is really the value added aspect that HydroShare provides. But coupled with JupyterHub, we really have a method of reproducing science here. Not only do we have the processing workflow that may have occurred with the raw data, we have a very rich description of what that data is. And let's see, what else do we have? I think we should have authorship. So it also recognized that Jeff Horsborough was a collaborator or created that data, so listed him as a collaborator on this. So that's kind of getting started from HydroShare all the way to HydroShare, exploring JupyterHub, going through an example, and starting to connect the dots into where this can lead in the future. Now, I'm going to take
Tony,
one step.
Yeah. Sorry, Tony, we have a few questions. Would now be an okay time to catch up on those?
Now that would be great.
Great. So for items contained on the Discover side of HydroShare, have all those been published with DOIs?
No. So there's a big difference between public data. So everything on the Discover page is available for viewing to the public, right? So if you have a data set that you want to be explicitly private, it will not show up here. But if you have it public or discoverable, which is another option, it'll show up on the Discover page. The difference between something that is discoverable and published is that something that's published is immutable. It's a final state. So it's somewhere you want to get to. You want your data to become published, but you want to make sure it's ready. So if we take a look at some of the published data, so we can filter by published data. Excuse me. All of these are in a very final state, and they may be referenced in a journal article. So these are 89 things have been published. However, public data can be data that's in development. So that's a very long-winded way of saying your data does not need to be published for it to be discoverable for other people. I hope that answers.
One other thing, I think, Tony, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the discoverable tag there means that you can find it via the metadata, but you might not necessarily be able to download that data themselves.
Yeah, and that's something that's important for people to have sensitive data that they can't really release to everyone.
So we got a few more questions here in the chat box. Can I set who can modify files on my projects? So can you set administrators or project members like within a group?
Yes, you can. I don't know if we want to go into that too much, but you can. If you create a group, you can define the individual owners and an owner would have, the ability to change things in a group, as opposed to a member that would not have that. You can also do that same thing at the file level or at the resource level. So an individual resource can have multiple owners, can also be shared with people with read-only access or read and write access. So you actually have a couple different layers of granularity at the resource level and at the group level.
Great. When the resources are exported to HydroShare from JupyterHub, do they become publicly available immediately, or are they set to private by default?
Yeah, that's a good question. They are private by default. And so this last cell that I'm showing here, it's really, we're using the HydroShare API. So you can define whether you want to be private or public. If it's going to be, if it's public, it has to have the minimum data requirements, such as abstract, title, keyword, content, things like that. But you can also explicitly set it to public or making public equal to false. The library that we maintain, I think, defaults for everything to be public or to be private initially, but you can change that.
Thanks, Tony. And then can the data be in other formats, for example, an Excel file?
Yes. So in this example, we created a CSV file. We could have created an Excel file. I actually have an example that creates netcdf files that I'm going to show in a second. So yeah, it can be anything. Now, when you move it over to HydroShare, where is HydroShare? Over here. These data can be, did I lose my, oh well. The data can be in any format you want. There are certain formats that have value-added functionality, such as if you have netcdf file, we have routines that will automatically extract metadata from that. We have those for several different things. But yeah, there's no limitation to what files you can use.
Great. So we got two more. Can commercially, sorry?
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. Can commercially available software be used on JupyterHub? For example, could we run MATLAB by remotely accessing a license file?
I would say that JupyterHub is a platform that's very open and customizable. So I wouldn't say we're limited. I believe that the Jupyter project supports MATLAB. However, CUAHSI doesn't have licenses that you can use. So we'd have to look into it. It's possible that you could access your own license. There's also other free alternatives like Octave. I don't know if they would be interested in that, but right now we're focusing primarily on Python and R. There's no reason why, the reason why we haven't extended beyond looking at those two is because people haven't really been asking for anything else. If MATLAB is definitely something you want to explore, then we can maybe talk about that offline and explore options. But as far as I know, there's nothing prohibiting that.
So Amy, if you would like to follow up about that question offline, you can just send a note to help@cuahsi.org. Then last question for now, Tony, is can I link files directly from Google Drive or Dropbox?
Into HydroShare, I'm guessing. Right now, the only way you would be able to do that. So I guess let me start by saying that that integration with third-party applications like that is actually one of the focus areas for over the next 4 years for the HydroShare 2 project. So that's not built in natively, I'll say, but you can link to them in things like the abstract. So if you have specific data files that live somewhere else, what you would want to do is put them up here in the abstract, say, hey, these do live somewhere else. But as far as linking them as a piece of content, I don't believe that is something that we can do quite yet.
And that same answer would apply for accessing data stored in a Google Drive, for instance, via JupyterHub, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's all the questions we have right now. So you got you attendees here. If you still have any other questions, please do type them in the chat box. And Tony, the floor is back to you.
All right, so we're running very short on time, but I do want to show one extension of this work, of this very basic workflow in JupyterHub, and that is maybe how it applies to something that's more of a scientifically related workflow that you want to get out for reproducibility purposes. So what we're looking at here is national water model soil moisture over time. This is a nice figure, just plotting the calculations of the national water model, so nothing fancy there. But we can write some code, and I have just some code snippets floating around here on the right to collect this data. So HydroShare or CUAHSI maintains, I think it's 50 terabyte rolling window of national water model data, which ends up being like 4 or 5 weeks, I think, of data that you can access through JupyterHub. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Well, actually, I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you how you can share a workflow that might do that. So let me open back up this. This might be a little hard to see. Sorry about that. Okay, so on my local machine, I have a Python notebook that accesses national water model forecast data. And it performs some analysis, it subsets the data, and it kind of investigates this data. I want to share this with people. I want to publish this in the future, but I want to get it out there so other people can understand what I was doing. I have a small file. Oops, that opened on the wrong screen. We'll put it over here. A small animation that shows soil moisture changing over time for some area in the country. So that's a visualization of the gridded output data, a very small area of the gridded output data. And I also have some stream flow for 2 rivers. And the reason maybe why I did this was because these NetCDF files, the gridded NetCDF files for the national water model for the continental United States for one time step is like 300 megabytes or so. And you have to go through about 80 of them in order to get a time series of that gridded data. Well, I don't really want it for the whole continent or for the whole US, so I just want it for a small subset, so I have this routine to process it. And the same goes for the stream flow. I want a time series for 2 rivers, not for all of the reaches in the whole US. So let's go ahead and create a resource for this data. So I click on my resources, and when this loads, which seems to be taking a little bit, I'm going to say create a new resource. I'm going to call this Tony's National Water Model Processing Routine. And I'm going to copy the 3 files I have here. So I have a notebook and basically some output files. I'm going to go ahead and create that resource. And when this is created, okay, we have this kind of simple resource landing page. We have my 3 files that I created. This is a NetCDF file, so I actually can populate metadata from that. I'm not going to do it right now because we're low on time. But if I have these data and I can share this, let's share it with anybody that's interested in the CUAHSI Cyberseminar group can view this data. Okay. Even though it's private, if you're a member of that group, you can view it. So go ahead and become a member if you want to see this data. So let's go ahead and, okay, so it can be public. So let's imagine that someone finds this data set, or someone that's one of the attendees here decides to join that group and wants to understand what exactly went into creating this animation and this netcdf file. And the reason might be that National Water Model is popular, there's a lot of buzz around it, but you don't really understand how to interact with the data. Well, this notebook, hopefully called Access National Water Model Forecasts, should tell us how to do that. So I am going to, this is the reproducibility aspect of JupyterHub. I'm going to click Open With, and I'm going to say I want to launch it into JupyterHub. Okay, so what's happening right now is we're bouncing around to CUAHSI, the JupyterHub server. Our user space is being created, and we're going to be presented with the welcome page. Now, this process can take a second or two. It shouldn't be too bad. There we go. So we've just bounced into our own containerized environment, and we're at that welcome page that we've seen before. So if we execute a few of these steps in the welcome page, it'll log into our HydroShare account. You may be asked for a password if you haven't done that before. And what we can do is get a resource from HydroShare. And what it's doing is it's going and downloading the resource associated, or the resource that we launched from HydroShare. So it's taking a second because there's several files that need to be downloaded. We end up getting 3 files, a notebook, an HTML file, and a netcdf file. And inside there, we have that notebook is actually it's presented as a link. So I can click on that, and I'm sent over to a new notebook. I'm actually opening that notebook, Access National Water Model Forecasts, which looks like it's a typo. So I can walk through this, read the text in between each of these steps, and understand or learn how to access National Water Model data. This actually goes through interacting with iRods, so that's another feature that you might be interested in. Running bash cells or bash commands in a Python notebook, kind of investigating or learning what data is out there for National Water Model. And all the way down to downloading the data, and I'll show you how we can download some data. Here we go. We're downloading a whole bunch of channel data into the notebook or into the JupyterHub server. And then what we're going to do, and I'm probably not going to go through this because we're running out of time. I'll just tell you, you can load that as using the XArray library, and then plot that, create a plot of the forecasted stream flow, and then also access gridded data using OpenDAP. So I hope that shows you kind of full circle, not just introducing you to JupyterHub, but then if you have data that's out there, ideally you learn about a data set through a citation in a paper that takes you to HydroShare, and you're able to launch the data along with potentially a notebook that is used to analyze that data in JupyterHub, and that would take it full circle into scientific reproducibility. There may be some questions on that, so I want to finish up the last couple slides here so that we have time to answer any last-minute questions. So my thoughts on next steps. If you are new to the JupyterHub world, HydroShare JupyterHub world, and you want to get involved, or you want to play around, go to hydroshare.org and create a new account. You're going to need a HydroShare account. Once you have that, you can either go to quasi.org/Jupyter, or you can go to the apps menu button and launch the JupyterHub app. Play around with the examples that are up there. There's some pretty interesting things, running model simulations, doing some JS processing using TauDem, things like that. If you have existing code, upload it to HydroShare and see how you can run this remotely. And if everything is working fine, start sharing this with colleagues and start playing around with it. And really, if you can, this is a fantastic place to when your data or your workflows are complete, formally publish it in HydroShare and get a DOI that you can cite in your journal article. And that's my suggestions for moving forward. I have some links here on the right-hand side of some things that you might find useful. My contact information is on the left. If you have any questions that you want to contact me directly, or like John said, email, I believe is what, help@quasi.org, help@quasi.org. But I'm happy to take any other questions in the remaining time we have.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your presentation today, Tony. We'll wait here, I think, a couple minutes to see if we have any questions that come through the chat box. So you all participating, please, if you have any questions, please enter them now. So Tony, we have another question here. How does licensing and citation work for published workflows that build on existing data sets? I'm assuming this is simple if everything is CC BY, but what about cases where other licenses are attached to data sets? And the CC BY, sorry, the CC BY is the Creative Commons. I can't remember what the rest of it is.
So this is in I'm sorry, can you repeat that one time?
So basically, how does licensing work? So how does licensing and citation work? So if they're a typical open license, that's pretty easy. But if it's a more complex situation where you have different licenses that are attached to the data set.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, so actually, let me show. Well, I guess we don't have time to show anything, but there is the license attribute in HydroShare that allows you to specify what license your data follows. There's also an option to make sure that anybody that uses your data or extends your thing or downloads it adheres or checks a box that says that they will adhere to that license. And I also believe there's the place for you to enter. We have a few, 3 or 4 of them. They're common licenses, but you can enter your own if you wanted. I'm hoping that answers the question.
It answered it for me. We'll see if it answered it for everybody else. Let's give everyone maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to type in a question. Oh, yeah, we got confirmation that did answer the question.
Okay, great.
We'll wait 1 or 2 more minutes here in case any other folks have questions.
And I was told that there might be a bit of a typo in this link. It's actually quasi.org/JupyterHub. Sorry about that. That's why I was a little distracted during that last question.
Thank you for the correction. Okay, if nobody else has any other questions, I guess we'll call it. Thank you, Tony, again for the presentation today, and thank you all for attending today's talk, as well as hopefully the rest of the series. This actually concludes our spring 2018 Cyber Seminar series. So if you missed any of today's presentation, or if you missed any of the 2 earlier presentations, please visit quasi.org and you'll be able to find recordings of the presentations. Also, if you have any questions about the content that was covered, you can shoot a note to help@quasi.org, and that'll get routed right to our staff that support our data services. So thank you very much for attending, and Tony, thanks again for your presentation, and we hope to see you all again soon.